Hey everyone, and welcome to Bible 365 with Kathy Carter. Today is day 45. If you've never been with me before, I'm using the One Year Chronological Bible online reading plan. So it is doing a chronological reading historically from beginning to end of the Bible. If you have been with me before, fantastic. We are finishing up the book of Exodus today. So this is going to be our third book that we have read and finished so far. And so I'm hoping if you stuck with me, congratulations. I think it's really exciting to have finished 3 books. We have a few more to go, so we have some time left. But if you've never been with me, go back and try and pick up either at least in the book of Exodus or all the way back in the book of Genesis, if at all possible. So today the reading is short. There's not a whole heck of a lot that I want to talk about that hasn't really been talked about so far, but just a couple of points that I want to make. So again, always just reiterating, it is day 45 in our reading, Exodus 39:32 through 40, all the way to the end of 40. And then Numbers 9:15 through 23. So if we're starting in Exodus 39, we have met and been with Moses for a while. Moses is older, probably 80 plus years old at this point, and him and his brother Aaron have saved the Egyptians through God. They have saved, nope, not the Egyptians. They have saved the Israelites from the Egyptians who had them in slavery for several hundred years. And through God's power and his might, he has done all these miracles and he has brought them out of Egypt, over 1 million of them. I think yesterday we found out there were 603,000 men over the age of 20. So that's not counting the women and not counting the children. So we have over 1 million people there. And they are listening to Moses. They are building a house for God so God can dwell among them as a people group. And then, so today we're going to see sort of what happens now that everything has been made and created. Now what happens? So going right into the first sentence. So it's 39:42. So all the work of the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, was completed. So what it looks like is every individual piece was created. This is what I'm reading when I say it. Every piece was created and the work was all finished. The Israelites did everything just as the Lord commanded Moses. Then they brought it to Moses. So they did all the work, they created all the pieces, and then they brought them all to Moses so Moses can look over them and see if they're right, see if everything was done the way in which the Lord commanded him to have them done. So if I move on to verse 42, so they start naming all of the pieces. And then if I move on to verse 42, it says, the Israelites had done all the work, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Moses inspected the work and saw that they had done it just as the Lord had commanded. So Moses blessed them. I think I talked a little bit about it yesterday, but I'm starting to notice, I really kind of thought that Moses was just a guy just like the rest of them. And I don't want to take that away because in some ways he is. However, if you remember a few days ago, I talked about how he was a teacher and a leader and a prophet and a miracle worker. So he's all these things. And it looks like God has given him his power to lead these people. And so I say that because when they completed the work in the way in which the Lord wanted them to complete the work, and the way in which the Lord told Moses to have them complete the work, Moses has the power to bless them. And we don't see that very often. I think we've seen it with Jacob. We saw it with Isaac, right? They each blessed their children. We saw it with Abraham blessed his children. So I think that was it. I think those are really the only people that we've seen blessed so far. And so now Moses is blessing this entire people group because they did what the Lord commanded Moses to have them do. So I'm just putting together some pieces that I think Moses was a little more powerful, I think, than I had first recognized. I know for me, miracles, I really, really struggle with miracles because I live in such an area where they're kind of considered a little ridiculous. And so I struggle with the idea of seeing miracles, recognizing miracles for what they are, and then giving that to God So I've always had that inner turmoil sort of about that. And so when I see Moses having all this power and having all these abilities, um, I have to put it where I believe that it is, because I believe that that's what the Bible is saying, that he is a little more powerful, than probably a lot more. Again, here you can feel me holding back a little bit. Probably a lot more powerful than I ever thought he was. I always just thought he was sort of a mouthpiece, and now I'm recognizing he is a mouthpiece, but God has given him so much power and so much responsibility in order to lead his people. All right, so if I move down to, and this keeps kind of going in this direction. So if I move down to Exodus 40, a couple of things I just want to glance over are verse 1, the Lord said to Moses, set up the tabernacle and the tent of meeting. In verse 6, he says, place the altar of burnt offering in front of the entrance. In verse 9, he says, take the anointing oil. In verse 12, he says, bring Aaron and his sons. And the reason I'm bringing up these couple of things is they're direct actions, and it's not him telling the people to do it. It's him telling Moses to do it. And so it looks like the people created everything, and then Moses is the one that is putting it all together. Moses is the one that is bringing them to the tent. So is this, I mean, I feel like it could be one of two things. It could be God telling Moses to do this, and then Moses, much like he does with some of the other things, Moses sort of then sending it down to his people and having the people do it. Or it could be that Moses is the one that is doing it. I mean, he's setting all of these things up. And so once again, I think that first of all, the recognition that God is so holy, having all these things set up, but recognizing that Moses is something special, because Moses is the one, they could all build it, but Moses is the one that needs to set it up and bring all of these pieces together. Ultimately, the leader, the one that's in charge, which is the one that God put in charge, is the one that is responsible for setting all of these things up personally himself. And I think it because I think later it says Moses does as the Lord commanded him. So we see that in a couple of verses, even 19. Then he, Moses, spread the tent over the tabernacle and put the covering over the tent as the Lord commanded him. And then it says in verse 21, then he brought the ark into the tabernacle. So I'm thinking that is Moses directly doing all of these things. Verse 15, moving on just a little bit from this, verse 15, I think I've mentioned it before, but this is where Moses is anointing Aaron, which is Moses' brother, and Aaron's sons into the priesthood. And so they're anointed. So in verse 15, it says, anoint them just as you anointed their father. So this is the sons, so they may serve me as priests. Their anointing will be a priesthood that will continue throughout their generations. And so Aaron's line is going to be a priesthood throughout generations. So I don't even know if that might still exist somewhere, that Aaron's, somehow they know Aaron's lineage and Aaron's sons are still a priesthood. But it doesn't look like, I mean, as of yet, it says they're going throughout generations, that the generations following would all be priests in Aaron's line. And then Moses sets up the tabernacle. And then I want to read verse 31, because I found this interesting as well. So in 31, it says, so they're setting up the wash basin. Remember all these pieces that they were all putting together and creating. He placed the basin. So again, Moses, he placed the basin between the tent of meeting and the altar. So between when you come in and then between when you go in and speak to God, and put water in it for washing. And Moses and Aaron and his sons used it to wash their hands and feet. They washed whenever they entered the tent of meeting or approached the altar, as the Lord commanded Moses. So every time they would go in, they would wash their hands and their feet. And so they would remove dirt from their hands and their feet. They would cleanse themselves before they walked in to talk to God. And so I think there's something that needs to be said about being clean, right? As this here, right here and now, with the book of Exodus, among the Israelite people going into that particular tabernacle that was created. There's an idea of being clean before you approach God. So there's a cleanliness that what sets them apart, makes them holy, consecrates them before they go in and they have any conversations with God. And so there is an importance to being cleaned with water, to being clean before they go in and talk to God. All right, and then I want to move on to verse 33. It says, Moses set up the courtyard around the tabernacle and altar and put up the curtain at the entrance of the courtyard. And so Moses finished the work. So again, I'm going back to, it sounds like it's Moses and Moses alone. And I can't even imagine. So again, we're talking about like he's in his 80s probably. I can't even imagine how difficult it was for Moses to do this work and to do this work alone, to be the one that has to finish and do all this work. So then 34, it says the cloud then covers the tent of meeting. So this is God coming down and he's covering the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle to the point where Moses couldn't even enter it. So Moses wasn't, so the power of the Lord was so big and so great in there that nobody was able to go in there. Moses couldn't go in, even cleaning, right? He couldn't go in and be there when the Lord filled the tabernacle with his cloud. And then, of course, we see also that God, it says then, so it means God doesn't do that until after everything has been completed. So after it's all done, then God's going to come in. And again, like we're talking about God. God can do anything. So he has the power to do anything, right? So he could have come down and he could have been there, but he didn't. So he made this distinction and he made it important. So we would see that, right? So we would have an understanding that after all the work was complete and after everything was just as he wanted to be, then he comes down and he fills the tent. And then from here, what we see is that every time he comes down and he fills the tent, the people stay, right? So they don't move. So I guess it's time now for them. They've done sort of all they needed to do at Mount Sinai, and it's time for them to move on. But they move on with God and God alone. So God is, by day he's a cloud, and by night he's fire. So he is, what I would say is extremely evident among the people. He's making himself known because he's, at this point, what we've seen is he's on the mountain. Remember when Moses met with him on the mountain, he has already been a cloud on the mountain, right? And thunder and all of these things. And he's already been a consuming fire. So we saw all those things already a couple of chapters ago. So the people should be recognizing that this is how God shows himself, right? This is how God delivers himself to his people. Moses, he's showing himself very literally. Moses has seen everything but his face. That's the only thing Moses wasn't able to say. But the people have seen him as a cloud and as fire. And so they, again, all these words should, right? Because I feel like that goes for us as well. They should be recognizing that this is God and this is how he's showing himself. So every time he comes down, he's God. He's a cloud. Every time at night, he's fire, and they stay where they are. When they lift up, right? When God lifts up the cloud and the fire, then they know that they're able to move on from the location they're in. If he's down, they stay. If he's up and moving, they move on as well. So again, thinking the power of God is leading all of this, but he's also giving Moses the power to lead these people. And then in Numbers, it sort of repeats this same thing. And it says, verse 23, at the end of this section in Numbers, verse 23, it says, at the Lord's command they encamped, and at the Lord's command they set out. They obeyed the Lord's order in accordance with his command through Moses. So, finishing this section, recognizing that Moses is the one that God put in power. Why does that matter? So as somebody who lives in a world where there are people in charge, there's always somebody in charge. Where does this idea put Moses for us? Like, so for me, so when I think about it, like, did God appoint the leader of my country? Did God appoint the leader of my church? Is there a point where I need to recognize that it's God? And I'm saying this because in this time, it feels to me like God is so tangible. And I said to you earlier, like, miracles are hard for me. Miracles are hard to say. I can recognize when I hear people tell stories about him, And I think to myself, oh, how amazing. And yet, if I was there, would I see and know and believe that it was a miracle? Or would I go, well, that's just whatever, right? Modern science or the way the world works, or like, even I'm a few years after this, if you're watching this for the first time, but even in the time of COVID, like, was that something that God orchestrated for the world to have so that, right? Like, so we see um, in the book of Exodus, he does a lot of things so that his people will believe, so that his people will know it's him, right? Is that something that maybe we didn't recognize? I'm just throwing that out there. I don't know for sure, because to me, it's it's a little bit hard for me to recognize. And so I want to be able to recognize, I want to be able to clearly go, that's them. But even we can see that the people had a hard time. The people a few chapters back made a calf out of gold and called that the God that pulled them out of Egypt. And so I want to, here we go with balancing these scales, right? I want to both understand that I am those people, and I want to understand that this book has been given to me so that in the future, I won't be those people. I'll be the Levites that go, oh, no, no, Moses, I'm on your side, right? These people did the wrong thing, and these people dishonored God and honored some idol that didn't exist, right? So what do I do with my leadership, knowing that there's a chance that God put them in place? Now, I'm sure anyone who sees this is going to be, well, we need to be discerning. I agree with that. But is there something to the fact that we need to follow what leader is put in place, unless we see that they are directly overtly sinning against God? Or do we only need to follow someone that is a believer that we believe God appointed, right? So just kind of putting these things out there, because these are things that I wrestle with on a day-to-day basis. For the most part, I'm just a regular person doing regular things, and so I pay my taxes and I follow the laws. Um, but these are things that come to bear when like, these things need to make sense when I think, act, and behave certain ways, when I talk to other people, when I want to be dissenting when it comes to what I think is good for the country that I live in, right? So these are all just things that I need to think about and consider. Um, did God appoint this person? And therefore, if God appointed this person, unless they are openly telling me to sin, I need to do what I need to do to be a part of this country that God put me in, right? So God blessed me to be here. So it's just something to think about, something for my brain to work through as I go through my day to day life, right? And recognizing that Moses was somebody that was really particularly powerful, and that God put him in place. And he said, listen to him. I'm going to give him the rules, and I want you to listen to everything that he says. It's just something for us to consider as we go forward. So, on that note, we have ended the book of Exodus. And so I don't want you to put anything that you heard, read, or believed about this book away, because we're going to continue in our reading, right? We're continuing in the book of Numbers. But everything that you've read so far bears fruit. Everything you have read is good and true, and it's something that we need to bring with us as we move on to the next book in order to help us understand that book as well. So don't forget anything that you have read. Keep on reading and trucking through this. If you like it, I want you to just hit the like button. I want you to share it with other people, and I want you to subscribe to the channel so you keep getting it. Otherwise, I'm sort of nowhere in the YouTube world that you'll be able to get it. So make sure you subscribe to it if you want to watch any more videos. I'll see you next time. Next time, we're going to be moving on through Numbers, and I want you to keep reading.